Good evening, good day, good morning, whenever you tune in. This is, yes, Preston Smith with the three things courtesy of The Corners magazine, www.thecorners.pl. And hey, there's a new magazine out. You can find it online. And if you click online and you see it, because some people somehow miss this, but if you click on the title, which is on the left side, and it talks about the octopus, the mafia octopus, then the magazine opens up and you can scroll through the magazine, download it, whatever. Just thought I would let you know. But we're also coming courtesy of CDDI, cddi.pl. That's the detective agency side of my life. I sound a little bit schizophrenic already, right? The journalism, the detective side, I don't know. But we're coming to you from MRP Studios in the Praga, or on the Praga side of Warsaw, Poland. And if you haven't ever seen the program before, our take, if there is a take, is to be kind of non-political. We go after all sides and we talk about politics, true crime. Of course, we do talk about the war in Ukraine, but not only. And so let's get into it. What are we going to talk about this week? Well, the three things, because we always talk about three things most of the time anyway, that we're going to talk about. Well, first, yes, we're going to talk about scams. It's about time we talked about scams. I get a lot of questions about scams, and I want to talk about one in particular. So the first thing is actually going to be what are called boiler room scams, and I'll tell you why when we get there, but I'll give you a hint. I've had clients hit by these, and there's just been a plague of these, so we're going to talk about what they are and how often they're happening, and what you don't want to do to get yourself dragged into these things, and maybe what you should do if you are dragged into one of these things. And then the second thing, I'm actually cheating a little bit because some of the letters I got, and we're going to talk about some letters here in a minute, but they were like, we haven't talked about scams, and there's scams, and I'm worried about scams in my phones, and I'm a foreigner in Central Europe, and what kind of scams can hit me here, etc. So the second thing is actually also going to be about scams. I don't know if I'm cheating or not, but I want to talk about three that just keep coming up, and I mentioned these actually in the magazine, but we're going to go a bit more in depth. And then finally, the third thing is going to be, yes, the war in Ukraine, the Ukrainian war update. We're going to talk about it's not a lot of good news, but hopefully it's going to start raining and maybe slow things down. But I think maybe the Russians have kind of burned themselves out a bit, even in Avdiivka. So let's jump right in to the first thing. But you know what? No, let's not. I forgot. We have some letters. Actually, we have letters. I've got comments. I've kind of let you guys down. I kept saying I was going to do a special edition. We're going to talk about the letters, but let's talk about just a couple. I have to say, I'm going to say this because in this business, in any business, when you're in magazines, publishing, whatever, you don't get a lot. A lot of people writing in saying, "Oh, well, that was okay, but you missed this, or this is wrong, or da da da." But I did get some positive letters. I got one from PP in the U.S. He said he loved the magazine. It was great. Actually, I'm going to be honest with you. We're talking about, when I'm talking about PP, I'm talking about a guy that actually I interviewed in the magazine, and we highlighted and we put his photos in. Patrick Patterson, he's a Texas photographer. He was in Ukraine, spent some time there. His photos are actually pretty fantastic. We've talked about his stuff before. I just wanted you to check out the magazine and take another look at that. But I did get a letter from GG in Bulgaria, and this kind of cracked me up. He just said he was glad to see positive news about Bulgaria in the magazine. That threw me for positive news. Was there positive news about the magazine? We didn't get into a big investigative negative kind of mafia article in the magazine this time, so I guess that's what he means. I kind of was a little thrown by that. We did have, I remember in the briefs that we talked about, Bulgaria put a transit gas tax on Russian gas going through Bulgaria that Bulgaria is not using because it's in line with sanctions against Russia in the war. But that gas is going to Serbia and Hungary, and it really ticked him off. So maybe that was it. I'm not really sure about that one. But okay, let's go on. This one is from SD, Belgrade, Serbia. Dear Preston, Your cover story on the Montenegro mafias was interesting. We have followed this in the news. You should have mentioned Group America. Do you know about this? Well, I thought I kind of did. I mean, I mentioned Group America. I mentioned Group America last week on the show. But I'm not sure if I mentioned there was a big Brazilian bust where this was back in on the 11th of October. And I'm just gonna put a link to this because the authorities this was based on a Europol investigation, and the authorities busted some guys that were actually trafficking cocaine once again. And yeah, Group America was involved in that. And I really thought, maybe I'm just getting Alzheimer's or something. I thought that I talked about that last week. Or maybe he sent his letter a little late. I'm not sure. But anyway, okay, next letter. And this one actually cracked me up. It's a little bit silly. Sometimes you get silly letters. Dear Preston, or actually the question is not silly, but my answer is going to be a little silly because I've been dumbfounded about this for years. Dear Preston, what is the strangest story you have ever heard in CEE? Not necessarily a crime story. And this is actually from AZ in the Czech Republic, which is why I actually thought of this one. I'm going to tell you the strangest story that I ever came across in the Czech Republic, and it is the fire boy in Ostrava. Now, when I first hit Central Europe, and this is, 30 years ago now or something, it was like 1990, 91, somewhere around there. I worked in the Czech Republic, and I worked in Ostrava at the university, at the VSB University there. And I was actually, I was doing a couple of things while I was teaching history. And then I was, of course, as you do back then as a young guy, I was teaching English. But then I was working with a newspaper there, just doing a little bit of work for Nova Svoboda. And but anyway, I was teaching a class at the time, and as you do when you don't know Czech yet, it was right at the start. I ended up learning Czech. I got pretty good. Kind of forgot it now, but I asked the typical question before Halloween that hey, are there any like ghost stories in the Czech Republic, that kind of thing. And these guys, this is a university, and they all looked at me and said, no, but we've got the fire boy. I was like, the fire boy, what's the fire boy? And they go, no, the fire boy, this is a true story. The fire boy could use his mind to set people's pants on fire. I was like, again, he's back there laughing. I was like, what are you talking about? He goes, no, he would use his mind to set people's pants on fire. And the story of the fire boy was that at first, he just thought it was funny, and he was setting people's pants on fire with his mind. But then, because this was right before the fall of the wall, and there was communism, and the communists didn't have a sense of humor, at least not with getting your pants set on fire. So they arrested him, and they beat him up. And then after that, he became sort of like evil fire boy, and he started setting everybody's pants on fire just because he was mad at them. And the cops didn't like that. I guess he set their pants on fire too. And so they threw him into a mental institution where he was setting people's pants on fire, even though, because if you wrap him up in a straitjacket, I guess he can still use his mind. And in the end, he kind of lost his mind or something. I kind of don't remember the end of it. But I remember saying, guys, what is this? This is like kind of you're pulling a big joke on the foreigner. But they brought me at the time, and I kept those. I don't have them actually in Poland. They're back in a storage box back in the States in Texas, because years ago, for some reason, I took them back with me. There were articles in Czech from the Czech newspapers talking about the fire boy setting people's pants on fire. So I don't know if that's proof that it's true or not, but that probably is the strangest story I've heard since I've been over here. Now, that's enough. That's enough. There's actually more letters, but that's enough of the letters. That's enough of the introduction. Let's get into the first thing and talk about boiler room scams. Now for the first thing, boiler room scams. Now, boiler room scams, to be honest, and some people may kind of hit me on this and say that I'm actually being too vague or interpreting these as I will. But I work as a investigator, as a risk intelligence investigator and a licensed detective in Poland. And I work with a lot of other detectives and guys across Central Europe. And sometimes I work with detectives in the US. etc. And the boiler room scam is one of these things that keep coming up and have kept coming up for a long time. Now, this is not the CEO scam that you might hear about, the social engineering scam, but it's a little bit similar. And so I want to divide these very quickly. The social engineering scam is when someone, usually what happens is they have a team, and this is very well financed, and sometimes literally they'll spend a couple $100,000 on these things. They'll have a team of guys, and they'll pay off somebody a lot of times, get them into a company. Some guys will say, no, they just hack. But in my experience, they get somebody inside the company to help them, and they hack into emails, but they get some intelligence from inside a company, so they know how the company functions, and then they'll get into the emails and they'll act like they are a client and try to hit the CEO directly, because the guys lower down, they follow company policy, but this is why it's called the CEO scam. They'll hit the CEO's email and they say, look, it's before the weekend or before a holiday. These are the kinds that I've seen. Can you go ahead and send us the shipment? We'll pay you on Monday. They send the trucks, and then they find out that they're not getting paid, and that the client that they thought their long-term client, it wasn't their long-term client. It was someone faking this. It was social engineering. They were basically acting, imitating a different client. And I even had a case years ago. It was actually a French, it actually is a French, Polish, Swiss case where they had a guy that got on the phone supposedly and talked to a certain vice CEO or vice president, and he was sure he was talking to the right guy who he supposedly knew. They mimicked the voice. That was a little hard for me to believe, but they did somehow pull it off. Now, that's not what we're talking about. Today I'm getting a little bit roundabout. We're talking about boiler room scams. And the way that I see boiler room scams, maybe it doesn't fall quite into the definition, but I'm going to describe what we've seen and what we've dealt with. But before I do that, I'm going to point you to an article, because this is what made me think, I need to talk about this. There was an article that showed up on the OCCRP website, the Organized Crime and Corruption website. And it was police across Europe target more boiler room scams. And it talks about bank accounts of more than 20 European companies have been frozen as part of a multi-country investigation. These were schemes that involved the EU, Georgia, Ukraine, etc. And they go on and they talk about what is going on here. And I'll shoot that to you. But it talked about that the victims were mostly Swiss and German investors who were lured by like 100 fake websites. And you think, okay, what are they really getting at? Well, I'll tell you what they're getting at, as I understand it. The Organized Crime and Corruption, they're a great organization. They talk about some of these things, that people are getting screwed over, they're losing their money. But they're obviously getting this from the cops, and the cops tend to be very vague, and they don't always give you the real details of how it works. Well, the ones I've dealt with, and when I've had clients, this is what happens. And I know you're going to find it kind of hard to believe. You'll have somebody who is a wealthy individual, who you can find out that he's a wealthy individual. Maybe you just do a Wikipedia, some of the really wealthy guys who surprisingly fall for this. But they tend to hit guys who are kind of the next tier down or a couple of tiers down. So we're not talking billionaires that maybe feature in Wikipedia, but we're talking maybe like real estate moguls, or guys that maybe they built a business and they produced, widgets, and now they're worth 30 million, 5 million, 10 million. They're worth enough that, if you get online, you check them out, you check out a sector, their name will pop up as a leader in the sector, and then you can do a bit of research, find out more about them. You'll find out, this guy actually has some money. And the way that these guys think, these criminals that are doing these boiler room scams, is they kind of work a lot like risk intelligence professionals, in the sense that they do their OSINT, their open source intelligence. Because they'll look at guys, especially guys in real estate, or guys that kind of launch their own they're disruptive types of business guys. Why? Because they're risk takers. Okay, so they know that these guys are willing to chunk down real cash to make real money in a short period of time, and really that kind of defines the real estate, kind of the speculative type real estate investors. But not only, there's other businesses, maybe a little bit less now because the wars have slowed things down. But you can figure out who's a good target, right? Based on these types of profiles if you do your research. So then what they do is they will create very bona fide looking websites. They will create businesses that are really most of the time nothing more than post boxes, and sometimes they're not even post boxes. But if you hit those websites, you will see that this is not just like an investment group. This is an investment group that's got offices supposedly in, maybe they tend to kind of keep them out of the EU, so they're harder to check. So you'll see that maybe they're in Hong Kong, or maybe they're, I don't know, in Singapore, but they'll be spread out, but they'll be pretty, if you just hit online and you did your basic research, and I'm not talking about something that's just, for that, you're a complete idiot if you believe in this. You go through the pages, they've created things that actually look bona fide. They do this basic research first. Then they will actually do practically a cold call, and they will get in touch with these guys, these wealthy, individuals that are risk takers, and they'll say, look, we have this new investment plan, the financial instruments, etc. All kinds of different things they'll come up with. But if you invest here, the returns are going to be much better than average, and they don't tend to promise the moon. They promise returns that are believable, but still higher than average. And a lot of times, especially now, you find out that some of these private individuals, they have wealth. They don't exactly know what to do with it because they're looking around and the world is as it is, and they're gullible for this. And yeah, they're kind of marks because they've been researched, they've been targeted. They're seen that they are risk takers. And the guys that are talking to on the phone, and this is where things become very almost unfair. They're not talking to somebody who does not have experience in maybe investment banking, in trading, maybe even, I've seen one that was really commodity trading, which doesn't really fit into a typical boiler room scam, but investment banking definitely does. They will find guys, in what I've seen is they will find guys that used to be in those sectors. And in my opinion, sometimes these guys, they're victims themselves, or they've gotten themselves in financial trouble, and somehow they have been selected and pushed into these criminal groups. Because the guys that get on the phone that are doing the calling, they are very sophisticated, very convincing. They know what playing the stock market looks like. They know what investment banking looks like. They know what the commodities market, whatever they're selling, they really do know it because they did it for some time. One case, the guy that was making the calls, he pretended to be British, but I don't think he was actually British. I think actually in the end he was probably Australian. But at any rate, the guy he was calling was very convinced that he was dealing with someone who was bona fide, someone who knew what he was talking about, because he did know what he was talking about. And if it's the person that we think he was somebody that actually worked in investment banking for quite a long time, and then got into gambling and lost his money, and probably was sort of strong-armed into working for one of these groups. So the point is, though, the combination of this type, someone who actually really knows what he's talking about, may have 10, 15, 20 years of experience. He is now working for organized crime. He calls up to someone that has been targeted, promises higher than normal returns. And when that guy does his online checking, right, it looks bona fide because he sees these websites, he sees these addresses, he sees that, oh, right, this actually is legitimate and I can make better than average money. And yeah, there's been a lot of guys have been hit. We've been, to be honest, I've dealt with a few of these now. A couple of them, you know, this is kind of embarrassing for guys, right? Somebody who's made a lot of money, who's known as a successful businessman. He's maybe, you know, I don't know, maybe he's built buildings or he built a company, whatever, and now he's been taken for serious money. We could be talking $1 million, we could be talking $5 million. I mean, I'm talking real money. Sometimes it starts out maybe at like 100,000, 200,000, but then they say, oh, but actually, look, this is growing, you should put more in now. And they hit you at a time before you're expecting. You're not really, you know, you put money into an investment like this, you don't want the money back tomorrow. And then they lead you on and they put more money in, and then you put more money in, you're afraid not to believe it, you keep putting it in. It's a scam, and it actually is a successful scam. Now, I'll give you one first step that you can do a lot of times to just, you know, because there are legitimate, you know, kind of, I don't want to call them cowboys, but let's say in legitimate investment consultants that are not scamsters out there. We all know that. They're guys that they're in one business, they're in another business, they're calling up people trying to get money. Maybe they've gone through their friends. I'm not trying to just, you know, say that there's no legitimate business out there, but there's a way that you can see through this very, very quickly. And I tell you what it is, and it probably is not going to pop into your mind, but it's something that the layman can do. You don't have to have any, you know, deep net tools. You don't have to have anything that is super advanced. But after the guy calls, and after he sends you all of the convincing emails, and you check out the website and all that, just one quick thing, which may save you a lot of money. Hit those addresses that are going to be listed, and you might even see other branches and other websites and other addresses that are listed. That's why it looks so legitimate. And you may even see people's photos of the team, etc., and all that. Okay, you'll see these guys. You got to take a step further, and the first little step you can take, which sometimes is a dead giveaway just right there, is checking out the addresses. But you know how you check out the addresses? Very simple. Google Maps. You take the address, you put it on Google Maps, okay? And you see what pops up. The last couple of ones we've done, well, there was one that we did that actually is supposedly Hong Kong, right? You put the address in, the official address. This is supposed to be this, you know, international company that's got branches everywhere, and they're moving tons of money and making money for everybody. But you hit that address, and what happened? What showed up? Well, pretty much nothing. Like not even an intersection, but like a piece of highway, like kind of the pylons of a highway. I mean, you can see there's not even an office there. There's no office buildings there, right? Another one that we did literally showed up. I was surprised there was even a picture. It was just like fields. It was like, you know, just farmhouses. It wasn't even farmhouses, actually. It was just fields. It was just agricultural land, okay? The reason why that you'd say, well, why don't they at least have a post box and have an address? Well, sometimes they do. And we actually were able to help some because of the post box, you know, somebody's got to set up that post box address. You do that, you start working with the authorities. That is a lead. There is somewhere to go. It's definitely not a sure thing, but it's one of those things that these scammers in the beginning, a couple of years ago, you'd see they would set these post office box types addresses up, but you know, you steal money from people that are rich enough, they're not going to drop it, right? So now I think what has happened, or at least what I've seen, is that they just don't have any real addresses at all, because they realized that people were so gullible, not trying to knock guys that have fallen for this, but they see the websites, they read the literature, they get something from a guy who's a real pro, used to be a professional in finance or investment or whatever for years and years. They believe it. They don't just do a one tiny simple thing, which is take that address and just use Google Maps. And that probably will be a dead giveaway. That will probably be it. So that's the first thing. Maybe I saved you a ton of money. Maybe you I don't know. I don't know what you think about it. But let's go on to the second thing, which are scams that we see hit local foreigners all the time. And this is different than the boiler room scam. This is something completely different. So now for the second thing. Which are actually three things, which I'm just going to talk about three scams. And if you've looked at the magazine, you've seen these, because I highlighted these in the magazine. So you can go to the magazine, read the little article from the detective. If for some reason you don't want to listen to this, whatever, not a very good salesman, am I? But the three scams that hit foreigners all the time. Now, one of them is, which would be a fourth scam, or kind of the number one most damaging scam, would be this social engineering scam I talked about. But that's not really directed at foreigners. That's directed at just CEOs all across Europe. It costs, probably $1 billion worldwide every year. Some of those social engineering scams, like one of the first ones was when they hit Credo Bank for like 40 million. This was years ago. But they target companies, and they either are trying to suck money out of banks, but more often what we see is they're hitting like factories that have products, and they're trying to misdirect the products in different directions. That's a totally different thing. I'm just talking about you, if you are a foreigner in Central Europe, three kinds of scams that just keep coming up. And yes, the first one is the go-go scam, the stripper scam. Now, the stripper scam, I know that people have heard various versions of this, but I'm going to tell you exactly how it really works, because I remember talking to a guy who was telling me, oh, he loves to go to strip bars. Okay, well, that's your thing, go to strip bars. That kind of is a scam already, right? You're just throwing away your money. But he was like, oh, no, I mean, I don't worry about getting ripped off because I know the girls, and I guess he trusts them, which is for me a little bit nutty. But I always make sure that I carry cash, and I'm not gonna, not gonna use my credit card, et cetera, et cetera. Now, great, that is smart. If you want to go to the strip bar, carry cash, be sober, leave when your cash runs out. I guess that's the best advice. But what happens a lot of times, there's actually two different variants that we've seen again and again, year after year throughout the region. The first variant is simply that they slip something into your drink. Now, you'll say, oh, Preston, blah, blah, blah. No, I'm going to tell you that it happens. It happens all the time. If you check out the magazine, you will see that the Polish police have made a lot of us, but it's not just in Poland. What they do, what the girls do, and this is where the scam, why it's kind of genius, okay? If you go into a strip bar and you see a cash machine, like we call them bankomats here, but you see a cash machine, boop, your spidey radar should come on. Not saying every strip bar is a cash machine. I'm going to wind up with some big, no necks on my back now because I said that. But the thing is this. You go into a strip bar and they slip something in your drink, not to knock you out. It's not a knockout drug thing. It's something to make you more drunk, like make you appear more drunk when you're actually drugged. Then what happens is it's time to pay, but you don't have enough cash, because as soon as that stuff hits you, I guess you spend a lot of money on girls, but you don't even know how much you're spending. So they take your money and they say, oh, wait, you didn't have 2 dances, you had 8 dances, and you bought champagne that was super expensive, you got to pay. So then the guy, he's pretty much out of it. Now, what the strip bars and the go-go bars and all that, what they don't want is to have a complaint that somebody was strong-armed, beaten up, threatened, whatever. No, that's not how it works. What happens is now you're kind of out of it. So the girl who is in on this, she leads you over to the cash machine and she helps you take out the money, right? In the sense, she might, and this is on a camera, she might help you punch in the numbers, whatever, but she makes sure that when the money comes out, that you, as the victim, the John, you take the money out and you give it to her. They make sure that there's a camera here. This has been the way this scam has always worked. Because at that point, even if the cops know, the mafia knows, the girls know, everybody knows that something was wrong, you were probably drugged, that you don't usually go and pull just crazy amounts of money out of a cash machine and then give it to a stripper and she runs off with it. I mean, how many dances did you have that night? It's very difficult to prove, and it's a no-go in court because you go to the prosecutor, you go to the police, they don't even want to take it because they're going to go, well, look, I mean, there's a film of it. The establishment has a film of you taking this money out and giving it willingly to this stripper. She can charge whatever she wants. So that's, one of the main scams. The other scam, which doesn't happen so often now because they clamp down on it, because it's actually a little bit easier to prove because it's just basically kind of a menu flipping scam, but it's something that still happens in Central Europe. And you know where, to be honest, I don't want to pick on one country, but the places where I know that it still does happen is Hungary and Latvia. Still happens in Hungary and Latvia. Actually, I haven't asked, but probably in some other places. I mean, I'm not going to pick on Gigi. I'm not going to pick on Bulgaria. But what really happens is that they go in, and when the girl comes up, you buy her a drink. You think you're buying this drink, then they later say, no, you actually bought this champagne, which is Dom Perignon. I don't know, that was buried under, I don't know anything about champagne, to be honest. That's not what I like to drink. I like to drink whiskey. Whatever the case is, they charge you crazy money for the champagne, and there's big ugly guys, and you don't know what to do, and so you end up paying for it and get ripped off, and then they're counting on the fact that you're not going to go to the police or anything because it's on your credit card, and you don't want anyone to know, and you don't want the police, you don't want your wife to know, et cetera, et cetera. That's the old school, old-timey scam. It even still happens, like sometimes even in restaurants, where you go into the wrong restaurant, it's not a strip bar, and they flip the menu on you. That still happens, but that's not really what's happening most often. The go-go bar scam that has been kind of the in fashion of late has been what I said, this slip something into the drink so you look drunk, so you take the money out and give it to the girl, and there you go. Now, the second one that is hitting tons of foreigners, and these are mostly, to be honest, these are Africans or Indians, people that are coming, foreigners that are coming to the region, and they're usually working pretty low-end jobs, and there's the question of getting a visa, okay? Now, when you get women that are coming here, they might have kids back home. They're trying to get out and they're trying to work as a student, but they want to get a visa, and depending on the regulations, for example, in Poland, if you want to bring your children here, you're going to have to show that you have enough money in the bank to get children. There's other types of cases which are kind of the same when you want to show that you've got enough money in the bank to live a certain amount of time. It depends on the actual country that you live in. But they do target women in Poland. And I've run into a couple of cases like this now. And what happens is this. The woman wants to bring her children here. Okay, she's maybe here as a student, okay? She wants to get a visa for her children. She's got to show she's got so much money in the bank, right? She doesn't have that money, right? Otherwise, she wouldn't have, she's a student, okay? We'll just leave it at that, okay? She doesn't have that money. But then people from usually her own nationality, she will ask around, I don't know, what do I do? And then somebody will, oh, I know some guys, and they'll help you out. You can put the money in your bank account, okay? Leave it there until you file all your information, your applications, etc. And then they'll want it back. Then you'll have to just take it out in cash and give it to them. Now, obviously, what this person does not know, maybe she knows But a lot of times they're not thinking like that, right? Because it's coming through friends, or they think that they have become a money mule at that point. So at the point that they had the money in the bank, one, they can't explain why that money was sent to them, right? Two, they take it out and they give it to someone else in cash. They've just laundered money. They have also done something, which is they basically falsified information in order to get this visa. Now, the guys that are doing this, they'll tend to hit they're basically victims, these money mules. They'll hit them again and again and again very quickly, a number of them at the same time, because usually they'll work different. For example, if we're talking about, say, Indians, they'll hit a bunch of Indians. We're talking about Africans, they'll hit different Africans, maybe even from different parts of Africa, but kind of through, because what happens is somebody, oh, it worked for me, I got my visa, it worked for me, I got my visa. The way the justice system works doesn't mean they're all going to get arrested tomorrow. This starts showing up on the radar. Banks start noticing, hey, what's going on here? The cops see basically a kind of a tendency that, hey, what is going on with all these transfers, and then people cashing out, and they're all foreigners and they all want visas. This stuff actually just does start showing up, and it becomes visible. And because the police and the kind of like the equivalent of the FBI in different countries, they're watching, they're monitoring that type of thing also for terrorism purposes. They see that, uh-oh, something is going on. Now, in the meantime, the organization that is doing this, they're hitting lots of guys, taking out the money in cash. By the time the cops react and come in and start going after the people that receive the transfers, because obviously that's what they see, these guys have gotten their cash and they're gone. So who winds up getting arrested? Who winds up getting in a lot of trouble, eventually getting deported, even locked up, accused of belonging to a criminal organization because they actually laundered the money? Well, these money mules. So all I can say to that, if you're watching and you're in a different part of the world and you want to come to Central Europe, you kind of got to do it as honest as you can. I know it's hard to say that some people are refugees, they're real refugees, they don't have anything, but when you show up and you don't have any money, it's easy to become a victim. We actually are seeing that, though, which is a sad thing. That makes me sad, because there's not necessarily anything we can do about it. Now, finally, the third thing in the second thing, this is what I call the unproven IT venture capital scam. Now, this isn't exactly a scam. I'm just saying this because we've seen it again and again. And the reason I'm saying it's not a scam is because it usually involves very talented, idealistic, sincere, young IT geniuses, right? And venture capital types that want to jump in and develop the next big thing. This might be an app, this might be some sort of disruptive IT technology, whatever. Okay, so it's not a scam, but both sides tend to be trying to, I would say, take advantage of the other side in a way, but in a way not. And here's why. And this is something that I've now seen. It was really, this was happening a lot a couple of years ago. But what it was, you'd see some young guys. They really are geniuses. They're the smartest guys in the university. They get out of university, they've got some good ideas. They know how the IT world works, and how if you do the right app or even the right, mobile phone game or whatever, that you can make a ton of money. But if you invent something that's going to be really disruptive, you can get venture capital for it. So there are venture capital guys that what they've tried to do is they put in the first injection of money. These guys have the IT geniuses have a certain amount of time to develop the prototype or to make progress. It's best if they can develop the prototype. Then they can take it to the next level, and the first guys that put in the money will actually try to get their money out, and this will go to the next level to guys who are more international, who've got more money, and etc. That's if it goes well. The problem is a lot of times these IT geniuses, they might be geniuses and they did great, and they're working on their PhD at university, whatever, but they've never actually had a job. I mean, they haven't even worked like at McDonald's or anything. They certainly haven't managed people. They certainly haven't built a team and run a team and hit schedules and done budgets and actually been able to meet expectations in the real business world, right? So not that they're trying to scam, but they're setting themselves up to fail because they actually they don't have the experience, they haven't been guided, they haven't worked under a tough manager that shows them what you have to do. And they also a lot of times don't know how to deal with people, they don't know how to treat them. They get into trouble with their workers because then they get, they're coming up on a deadline, they're not even anywhere near there. So they're yelling at people, they're mistreating, they get accused of workers' harassment, which actually, for example, in Poland has a criminal element. You can have all kinds of issues there. And then on the flip side, you get the venture capital guys that now they're not doing it so much, but they were kind of throwing money at these young guys, and they're setting themselves up to fail because these guys are too young, right? They're too young. And so that third one, maybe it doesn't count as a scam, but in the end, for both sides, something just beeped. Some IT guy's hacking me now. It's probably going to destroy me for saying this. But on both sides, when you get into a situation where one side's inexperienced in promising the moon, the other side's got the money and promising the moon that there'll be a lot more money if you do this, it's a little bit, you're kind of fooling each other, to be honest. Kind of fooling each other. Now, that's enough of that. Let's get on to the third thing, which is the war in Ukraine update. Now for the third thing, the Ukrainian war update. Okay, as you probably are expecting, not a lot of good news here. Now, I'm not going to rehash some of the stuff that you've already heard in the sense that, that the aid's not necessarily coming, that there's a stalemate. I am going to rehash some of it, but there's a stalemate on the border in Ukraine, etc. I'm going to bring up first a little bit of good news, and then let's jump into the reality of maybe what we should expect. Because the fact is that this week, for example, I said last week, suddenly the press were questioning whether or not the Ukrainians can have success in the war. This week, you started seeing articles, for example, in the Telegraph, basically saying the counteroffensive is over. It's basically, there's some in the press just basically saying it's failed. It hadn't, and I'm not saying the Telegraph said that, but they were saying that it's over, it's done, and the future does not look great. But before we get into that, let's talk about a few things. Last week, you may have heard, yes, once again, these Ukrainian sea drones hit and sank Russian Black Sea Fleet ships. Now, there's a video of this. We're going to put that up. You can probably see it now. Put it up next to my head of what this looks like. I put one of these up before, and you just see this kind of little, triangle boat type thing. These are more advanced. They're just getting more advanced all the time. And as we've noticed, we mentioned before, the Russian Black Sea Fleet has been seriously damaged in the past. This time, though, there were a couple of what are called Russian BSF landing ships. There was a Cerna-class vessel. That's not the first time a Cerna has been hit. And then Andrata-class vessel, and they were actually at a port in occupied Crimea. Now, this was actually put up on Telegram. The Ukrainians made a big deal about this. It is a big deal. It's kind of remarkable that now you can have a very dominant navy, you think, but you also have to worry about what's going to happen if people get a hold of sea drones, or even now thanks to the Gaza conflict, the U.S. Navy is worried about it's hard to even see, say, small wooden sea craft that might have just a guy with a rocket launcher on it. If it's at night, it's hard to pick those things up on radar. It's kind of the world is, you've got technology that's changed everything on the battlefield, but then on the flip side, some of the best technology that that we basically counted on is going to change things, not on the battlefield, but also on the high seas. Now, at the same time that we're seeing Russia punish, or Ukraine punish the Black Sea Fleet, there are advances that are showing up on the Russian side of the battlefield. Now, there's a couple of things that have come up, and I mentioned it last week, but again, I saw there's another report of another Ukrainian MiG shot down. There was a terrible day a couple of weeks ago, I guess about 10 days ago, when 7 Ukrainian MiGs were shot down in one day, and people are, what are the Russians doing? Is it a technological advantage? Is there something that they're doing that is different? Well, there's one thing that may be flying under the radar. I actually didn't mean to make a pun because this isn't funny. But one under the radar issue may be going back to F-16s. Now, why am I saying this? We have seen again and again reports that the Ukrainians are getting training in F-16s, that they're making progress, that they're actually flying F-16s now. They're beyond the theoretical, they're beyond just, the flight simulator stage, etc. At the same time, suddenly we were seeing Ukrainian aircraft downed in Ukraine. Well, this goes back, in my opinion, and I'm not taking this information, it wasn't leaked to me, etc. It's just common sense. It is based on a few things that I've sort of heard on the grapevine, but nothing that I would say was coming from, what I would say some underground unnamed source. But who are you going to send to the U.S. to learn how to fly F-16s? Your best pilots. How many of these best pilots do you have? Well, we know that in Ukraine they have a general manpower shortage across the board now. They just do. The same thing is true with pilots. Some of the unbelievable exploits, which were believable, they were really happening, that were keeping the Russians from being active with their own aircraft in Ukraine, and this goes beyond, let's say, just anti-aircraft or anti-aircraft missiles, that type of thing, was the fact that the Ukrainians were exceeding expectations as fighter pilots. But there were if you're just daring beyond belief and you do that again and again, these guys, they're very susceptible to eventually getting shot down, getting killed, etc., etc. Now you take the best ones that are still left, and you send them to the U.S. to get F-16 training. And logically, you're going to have guys that maybe are less experienced, that are more vulnerable to getting shot down. And this may be the explanation. It may be that simple, that it's not some huge Russian technological advantage that suddenly changed the game when it comes to the Ukrainian Air Force. But it is a worry. We are seeing, however, at the same time that the Russians are coming up with more advanced technology now. They have more advanced, these K Alligator attack helicopters, which were already advanced helicopters. Then they basically, there's a couple things they did. One of the things they did, they just started putting on longer range missiles on them, longer range, so they didn't have to, they weren't so prone to getting shot down by the Ukrainians. But we were seeing, we've seen better jamming techniques by the Russians. But now we're also seeing with these Lancet drones, Lancets that don't actually target the armored vehicles of the Ukrainians. They don't hit them directly. What they're doing is they're actually they're going off next to or above the target and shooting out projectiles that are basically just molten metal into the actual armored vehicles. This is new technology, and the Lancets are actually punishing Ukrainian armor. Now, the flip side to all this, which is really kind of interesting, is at the same time that you are seeing these types of Russian technical advances, and there is more Russian ammunition coming. I mean, they do have, that's not a technical, they just have more ammunition. They're getting it from North Korea, but they just have more than the Ukrainians. And that's a complaint that I'm hearing from my friends in Ukraine saying, man, we need shells. Okay, we'll get to that in a minute. But at the same time that Russia suddenly pops up on the battlefield, and there's a crazy story out of Avdiivka where the Ukrainians were talking about seeing like a robotic ammunition or equipment carrier, like kind of a spider type thing that was moving along in Avdiivka. There was a couple of weird reports like that. I didn't see a photo, I didn't see anything, but the Russians are coming up with this thing, but then they've got a manpower shortage of their own. And this is making itself felt in Avdiivka, which we're going to get to in a minute, because they seem to now be resorting to just literally, they've gone through a lot of their armor, they've gone through their tanks, and they're just like throwing men at the front, trying to overwhelm the Ukrainians, and they're seeing huge losses. So you've got this kind of weird, paradox on both sides at the same time, which does kind of lend you to believe that we're just getting deeper and deeper into a stalemate, although we're not sure if the Russians actually believe that. Now, when it comes to the Russian Navy, back to that, and it talks about the number of ships that have been hit, the kinds of ships, I'm just going to put a link. Actually, tell you the truth, you can just hit Wikipedia for that. Maybe I'll give you the Wikipedia link. Wikipedia is actually keeping track of that. So you can go through and see the ships. It's actually kind of astonishing what the Ukrainians have managed to do. But if we go a step further, now let's talk about kind of the reality of money. And the Ukrainians, how are they going to get money and how are they going to keep fighting this war? This is the thing that's really worrying me. There's the manpower shortage and there's the money shortage. Now, we remember back, I think it was October 21st, when the Biden administration came out and said that they were going to rush through, because they could see there was Republican opposition, they're going to rush through this big $105 billion aid package for Ukraine. Honestly, it should have been pretty obvious that was going to backfire on the Biden administration. You try to ramrod something like that through, maybe they should have actually the Biden administration should have been much more conservative and said, we're going to continue Ukrainian aid at this level, something that the more right-wing Republicans would not blow up about. But that $105 billion, that whole thing, that is dead. That's just not happening now. But it's actually, I'm really worried about what this means. This is an article, you can see it next to me, Bloomberg. This came out today or the day before. This is actually, we're on a Sunday right now, so if you see this on a Tuesday, you'll know. But Pentagon is throttling Ukrainian aid as funding push stalls. Spokeswoman says $1 billion left to replenish weapon stocks. $1 billion is a lot less than $105 billion. That's kind of a shocking difference, right? Now, then the next article, this is a Reuters article. You can see it. EU's 20 billion euro plan for Ukraine military aid hits resistance. Now, if you read the Reuters article, it basically doesn't say it hit resistance, but it's talking about it probably will hit resistance, that the Europeans, they may balk at that. But the interesting thing about that is they're talking about breaking that up over 4 years. So you're talking like 4 or 5 billion for 1 year and then the next year. And so that's very indicative that they're expecting this to just keep going on and to keep going on. How long can Ukraine keep going on like this? This is not responsible, if you ask me, coming from the West. Not that I think that you don't want to, don't bite the hand that feeds you, but this is, not something that I'm super positive about. But this last headline is something that actually worries me a bit more. And it's the Czech President Pavel hits at negotiations that Ukraine cannot achieve an advantage in war. Now, who is Petr Pavel, right? Well, Petr Pavel is the Czech president. Why is he important? Well, Petr Pavel himself is a retired Czech general. He was also a top guy in NATO. He's got contacts. That headline kind of jetted around very quickly around the world, and a lot of people didn't notice it, but for me, it kind of indicates what really is being talked about behind the scenes. And we've seen these articles, we've heard this news about the U.S. starting to press on Ukraine to try to negotiate. Petr Pavel was talking about he thinks negotiations will begin next year. We still have no indication that the Russians are actually willing to negotiate. We're just seeing that they are very determined, for example, to take Avdiivka. But that leads us into the actual maps, and we're going to run through the battlefield report. We're going to mostly focus on Avdiivka and Kherson and a little bit on Kupiansk. We're going to jump through that. So let's go to that now. Okay, so if you take a look at this first map, I'm just putting it up as I always do to show you the entire battlefield line, the entire front. You can see, you got Kherson at the bottom, and you got Zaporizhia, and then we go all the way up, through Donetsk, then the Svatovo front, Kupiansk. If you've been watching the show, you've seen that map a bunch of times. You know what that is. Let's jump to Kherson, okay? Now, Kherson has been quite interesting over the past, especially the past 10 days. And it's still interesting in the sense that, yes, Ukraine they've crossed the Dnieper River. They've got footholds. And if you take a look at this first map where you see Kherson, and if you go up on this map, you will actually see, let's jump to the second map, you will see you've got Kherson, but if you go to the second map, you see Pishchenivka, then you've got Kozachi Laheri, and if you go all the way up, you'll see Krinky, okay? And you'll see this arrow at Krinky. That's because the Russians are trying to do anything they can to get the Ukrainians out of Krinky. Now, before we go further, this gray area, you're like, that whole gray area is on the other side of the river from Kherson. Yes, it is. Because the Ukrainians are actually, they've crossed in various places. I don't think that deep state UA or anybody aside from the Ukrainians and the Russians fighting them know exactly what the situation there is, except that there are small bridgeheads in different areas. Now, there was information that the Ukrainians were actually getting armor across, and there, that made a lot of guys jump up and down. Man, they're actually going to get armor across. This could be a big breakthrough. Not saying it can't be a big breakthrough, but when we're talking about what they're actually doing and the amount of armor, what I'm saying, these are small figures. I don't know if I would believe that there are more than 1,000 Ukrainians combined at these different locations on the other side of the Dnieper. And we're talking about armor vehicles. I haven't heard that they've gotten, say, leopards across or anything like that. I think that's a small amount, and it's really quite clear that the Russians are doing everything they can. And in fact, there were interviews from Ukraine saying, yeah, our guys are across the river. They're being hit with everything. That includes drones, artillery, phosphorus, which should not be happening. These guys, it's a tough go. Now, if we jump up to Krinky, okay? Now, Krinky has gotten a lot, at first, they're like, Krinky is not that big a deal. It's actually more to the west, but now it's Krinky. Probably the reason why it's Krinky is the fact that the Ukrainians realize that they got across and they get their guys into the forest area. And if you take a look at this map, you can see Krinky, but you see that kind of to the west of Krinky. The Ukrainians have been trying to get into that forest area because, as we know, in the war, once you get troops into these forest areas, they hunker down. Nobody can see. The battles are really tough, but it's hard to get either side. It's hard to get out of there. We believe that the Ukrainians they've gotten into Krinky. They've tried to get into the forest. Maybe they've gotten into the forest. The Russians are doing everything they can to try to stop this, but they don't seem to be able to get them out. But this doesn't seem like we're on the edge of a major breakthrough here. So I think we got to be kind of sober when we take a look at this and we consider what's going on here, that, yeah, it's impressive. It's probably causing the Russians a great deal of consternation, because the last thing they need is suddenly at Krinky and down at Kherson that the Ukrainians start making some real progress. And they still might, which would drag the Russians away from Robotnia. So let's go to this next map, Robotnia in Zaporizhia, right? We talked about that. We're not seeing a lot of progress there. Just going to jump through it. We did again hear once again that the Ukrainians were making progress in Verbove. They're about to have a breakthrough, but that doesn't seem to have happened. They seem to be just on the edge of Novoprokopivka, haven't made much progress there. The Russians, as I think I've repeated in the last few shows, pushing hard from the west, trying to make life difficult on the Ukrainians that are pushing at Novoprokopivka, but not a lot of news, nothing to say. Again, things seem to be just moving more and more towards a stalemate. If you take a look at this Verbove map, I'm just showing you that. There's really not, I don't have much to say except, we heard back and forth last week that first the Russians actually were pushing straight, kind of northwest out of Verbove, trying to actually come right back to the Ukrainians, and the Ukrainians came right back at them. The Ukrainians looked like they were making progress, but now, once again, we're not hearing anything that is basically encouraging at this moment. Not to say that these guys aren't incredibly brave. And I tell you one thing that's amazing, though, which I will mention, is that the average age, apparently, of the Ukrainian soldier now is 40 years old. I'm older than that, but man, the winter's coming, things are going to get yucky. God, 40. God, I remember how I felt. I felt great when in my 30s, then I hit 40, and suddenly I didn't want to run around and play basketball anymore, that's for sure. Now, let's take a look at this wider map, and you've got the Orkiv sector, and I'm showing you this. It goes all the way up to all the way up to Marinka, basically. So you see Velika Novosirka, Buledar, all the way up to Marinka, and then you can get all the way up. You can get up to Avdiivka. I'm just showing this to you so you know where you are on the map. What I want to do, again, I don't think there's a reason for us to really talk about Velika Novosirka or to talk about Staromayorsky. I want to talk about Avdiivka. So let's jump to Avdiivka. And yes, the Russians are still pushing hard there. Now, the latest reports, and this is Sunday, Sunday the 12th, November 12th. Is the 12th, right? Yeah, it's the 12th. Because yesterday was Polish Independence Day. I should have probably talked about that, shouldn't I? But today's November 12th, and things have been a little bit slowed down a little bit there. The Russians, they're using artillery, and the Ukrainians are expecting another big push. But the big push kind of happened over the last, actually this has been going on for a month. But over the last week, again, there was a big push, and they were just talking about these endless Russian attacks. But they have stopped being with tanks and armored vehicles. They're literally just throwing bodies at them. And although at first there were a lot of doubts, now they're really they're serious military analysts. I think I'm pretty serious, but some of the guys that are supposedly known military, they're saying they really do believe now that the Russians have lost 10,000 troops at Avdiivka over the past month. That is a huge amount of troops. And the guys that they're losing, they're not skilled. They're not able to actually move forward on just an infantry without, in a coordinated fashion that's not going to get them killed. Now, that's kind of the good news for the Ukrainians. The bad news is that there have been reports, and if we take a look at a little bit of a closer map of Avdiivka, you'll see that there's a lot of activity in the south. You see all the arrows, the Russians pushing there. You can see in the north, and remember we were talking about the Russians wanting to get to Berdichi. That doesn't seem to be in the cards, but if we go and we kind of zoom in, and you'll see up at the top, right in front of Berdichi, you've got Stepove. Over the last few days, there have been reports that the Ukrainians have taken the Russians have taken Stepove, and then no, they haven't, that they've taken maybe half of Stepove. No, they've been pushed out. That they've taken the whole thing. No, they've been pushed out. Probably the Russians have actually moved in and taken part of Stepove. Now you say, well, okay, well, what does that really matter? Well, the thing is, from the south and from the north of this pincer, that if we go back to the southern map, you see this pincer, it's not, that distance is not that great. And the biggest problem here is that if the Russians actually take Stepovi, that's like potentially a step too far for the Ukrainians, and it puts the Russians in a actual position to cut off the only supply line into Avdiivka, which would mean that, that they would have to just get their troops out if it looks as if this is going to happen. Now, what is remarkable is that the Ukrainians still keep stopping the Russians. They keep holding them off. The Russians just keep kind of, just losing troops and losing men. It's not a given that they'll take Stepovi, but if we do hear over the next few days that the Russians have taken Stepovi, then I would not be surprised if you don't see a quiet pullout by the Ukrainians, because this means things are really getting dangerous. It's not a given, though, that it's going to happen, but it would be a huge, huge public relations triumph on the Russian side if they took it. And probably, and what I'm worried about is that would also, for Putin, would give him, he would justify it to his country to say, see, we don't even need to negotiate. We're actually winning the war, etc. So this battle may be more critical than you think. Now, Stepovi itself is just a tiny little place. Take a look at this next map, this deep state map. You see it, it's like, what is that? That's nothing. That's not the point. The point is not what it is, the point is where it is. So this is something that I would say you need to watch, pay attention to over the next few days. Now, let's jump up north, further to Bakhmut. Not a lot of changes there, except that the Russians and the Ukrainian General Staff has acknowledged this. They came out with this, that the Russians have been pushing hard to try to take back the gains that the Ukrainians made in the counteroffensive, and they did make some. The push, though, is not only at Avdiivka and Klishevka, but as you see by the arrows up at Yahidne, Ivanivsky, this is not particularly something new. No one seems to be making much progress, but all along the front, the Russians are still pushing, even if it's a bit more start-stop. If we go up further north to the Svatovo front, all the way up to Kupiansk, you will see that way down at Bilohorivka, then a little bit further north, and then of course up at Kupiansk, the Russians are still on the offensive. They're still pushing hard at Kupiansk, forcing Avdiivka, but the Ukrainians, I gotta say, they're just amazing. They are not letting the Russians take it. However, if we take a look at this close-up in this of this deep state map, where you can actually see the gray zone here, and you see Avdiivka, yeah, they're right on the edge of it. So they probably have made a bit of progress, although details are lacking. Now, here's my face. I'm back. I gotta stop saying that. The Aussie man is gonna sue me or something. Actually, I'm kind of saying it because I'd like him to notice and write me a letter or say, hey. I know he has nothing to do with this channel, but his channel makes me laugh when I get down and cynical and worried about the status of world events. So Aussie man, if you're watching this, good day, mate. I actually lived in Australia years ago, and I was down in Melbourne. I lived in Bacchus Marsh. I went surfing at Bell's Beach, and the waves were big as mountains, and I was scared to death of sharks, and I started paddling my surfboard with my fingertips because I was scared. But otherwise, that's it. I hope I left you on an up note. This was the 3 things, courtesy of The Corners. Check out the website, www.thecorners.pl. And I didn't say it the whole time. Evgeny's going to kill me. Like and subscribe. Be a friend. Be cool. But also, don't worry too much. Good will prevail. Good will prevail. Evil will not win. I hope not anyway. Otherwise, over and out. Na sklenado. See you later. Cześć, do widzenia, and bye.